Okay, well, nice to be presenting today. It's really an honor. As many of you know, we've been around, very interested in passive house, and where our business has started in 2000. So we've been around for 25 years. It's a big milestone, and I personally became a certified passive house consultant back in 2010. Um, I was pretty frustrated with the standard of the buildings I was seeing around, and decided to do the Passive House course, and it really has been great, and a great community. I think that's the most important thing. One of the things that I was finding is that I was frustrated with some of the groups that I was with, and I find that the Passive House community is very together and willing to share information, which is really great. Um, just our firm. This is another Buildings of Excellence project that we won, and we have the whole team there. Just our different outlook. We make sure that, we really think that architecture is about practice, or at least our firm is about practice, but it's also about all of the aspects that go with that I think are very important. So education, we've provided a fair amount of tours. You can sell a lot of young kids at this tours, get them young. And we're interested in advocacy as well. So trying to look at the codes and how they can change, because we're all able to show our buildings by certain means, social media, etc. We can give tours, but really the one of the strongest and best ways of getting people to build better and better ways is to change the laws, and we've been very involved in that too. So we have a couple of certified projects, and we have another one just happening right now. Um, and we have two Buildings of Excellence winners, and now the third is this one, BioFit. So BioFit is basically Building 10, which is part of the amalgamated campus up in the Bronx. Um, and it's a series of buildings that were built back starting in the 20s. And it was really started off as a counterpoint to all of the tenement buildings down the Lower East Side, principally. Um, and it was instigated so that they wanted to create housing that was of a different type. And hence the campus, and hence all of the larger buildings with larger windows, more ventilation, etc. Um, the particular three buildings that we're talking about here are built in 1941. So they weren't the first buildings, and they're not the tallest. They're kind of 2.5 stories in size. And there's a total of 48 apartments. It's around 60,000 square feet surface area for all the buildings. The apartments are in pretty bad shape. The roofs were neglected for many years. As with many affordable housing buildings, there's challenges with getting funding. And this campus is really affected by the state of their facades, etc. And they're spending a lot of money repairing buildings rather than looking ahead. And um, so this project is important to try and fix it up and really get it to the next stage. Um, so there's only 10 apartments that are occupied out of the 48. And we really want to change that for obvious reasons. Um, there's no elevators in this building, so a little bit easier for passive house requirements. Um, the brick facades require upkeep, relating to the comment I just made about all of these buildings requiring significant amount of money to keep up those facades. So that's a consideration that we're looking at on this project. Um, the basement spaces aren't well utilized, so there's an opportunity to convert some of those spaces. And yeah, it's a really going to be a showcase project for Amalgamated, and hopefully will serve as a case study that they can replicate for the other buildings. So these are the original drawings from the architect George Springsteen. Um, Beautiful drawings, and lays out all of these plans with many bathrooms with windows on the outside, etc. Um, and mostly one bedroom and studios. It's brick, structural walls, and then steel columns and wood framing, and the stair cores are masonry. So there's a single stair um, egress for all the apartments. There are some very nice features on the facades with some brickwork and stonework around the entrance doors. Um, and obviously, you can see here some of the repairs that have been done. A few years ago, there was such extensive roof damage that the roofs were completely redone. So there are very nice slate roofs and flat roofing as well. So that area, it's been contained in terms of the damage, but obviously there's a lot of interior repairs that need to be done. Um, the interiors, here's just a few images. On the right, a lot of rooms have double aspect windows, really good light and air. And then obviously the photograph on the left is quite typical in some of the units where there's been some significant damage in the apartments. Um, yeah. Basements, this is very typical as well. Good opportunity to convert and make better use of that space. So I think yeah, it sounds like most participants are pretty familiar with Passive House here, but one of the things that we need to look at for Passive House projects like this is what's the form factor. Um, and it varies, obviously, if you pack a lot of people on top of one another, your building is going to make it easier to make that energy efficient, right? So there's calculations to provide that. You can obviously the tall buildings usually have better and lower form factors. Our previous projects, our tall building in Ad 1.2 are much less efficient. Titmus Park single family building is very tough, around three, right? Because you've got all those exterior facades and just one home there. So this building is, you know, not super great, but not the worst, because it has two floors of units, and some of that floor space is below grade, right? There's two floors and then a basement. The program for this is to look at this project in two ways. One is to put insulation on the interior and leave the brick as it is. We'll have to do some repairs to the exterior. And then a second strategy is to look at adding insulation and then a new material on the outside. So we're going to be looking at both of these options. Um, I should note that this is a DHCR project, so it has very long extended timelines. It's not by a private development, so there's a whole process to obtain the funding, etc. So we're going to use that time to to look at these different options and see what one works out, because there are impacts when you have to put insulation on the inside. We have some tight tolerances in terms of some of the rooms inside. And then we have also some implications with adding insulation to the exterior. How do we replicate or how do we create a new exterior facade that has some of the charm that these existing facades have? The This is just a sectional view of what I was just mentioning. Some areas are going to be very straightforward to thermally isolate, and some areas are going to be much trickier. Um, there is a um, I think one of the hardest parts of this project is going to be the airtightness, right? Because we have a situation where we have an existing roof and we'll want to insulate underneath that, and we'll have to look at how those connections are going to happen. And in our experience, the easiest, most straightforward projects are those where we're either doing a new building or we're doing a significant rehab, but where we can make that air tightness layer one single layer on the outside of the building. And we can't do that in this case. So this is going to be really part of the most challenging aspect of the project. Um, it is interesting also that we have three buildings and they're almost the same. There's very small variances in one of the buildings. So it presents an interesting opportunity for us to look at, well, do we make them all the same? Do we change a few little features in this building so that we can see how and monitor it and see how each one does? Do we change some of the solutions? So these are all things that we're going to be looking at as we go through the design. So you're probably familiar with some of the changes in HVAC requirements that are coming in, um, and the new refrigerants that are required have a better, lower global warming potential, but they are of a slightly higher flammability rating. And this is creating a situation where we want to try and minimize the amount of runs, particularly in the vertical aspect over a number of floors. Um, so, because of this new aspect, we have designed a system that will mitigate for that. So we're going to have an air source heat pump uh, in the outside of the envelope, and we'll have a heat exchanger, which will then loop cold or hot water to different fan coil units within the building. So that's the main way that we are looking to use water as a refrigerant rather than some of these refrigerants that have that are more flammable or more toxic. Um, there is going to be a ventilation system, an ERV system. We're probably looking at something on on this roof plane, and we're going to bring air down to the different units. Um, so heat pump water heaters, it's pretty standard now. Heat pump dryers, induction cooktops, that's pretty much standard for these projects like this. Um, the interesting thing about the induction cooktop is the whole campus of 13 buildings is looking at this, at putting in induction cooktops. And you may be aware that these induction cooktops require a lot of times they require 220 volts, and some of these buildings it's really challenging to get that. So they have come up with some great induction cooktops that have batteries in them and that allow you to stay on 110 and use the battery to kick in extra power when needed. So the whole campus is actually looking at this, and they're looking at whether or not, because these types of special induction cooktops uh, are more expensive, right? They have a battery and all that. So we'll be looking at whether or not it's cheaper to bring to just have the 220 power, or whether it's better to use these types of cooktops. In this project, it will probably be better because we're probably going to have to bring in more power anyway. So, but it looks like on the rest of the buildings in the campus, we're going to be going with the battery versions. So, healthy materials. So this is a big part of the way we are looking um, at passive houses now, because it's not just enough to make them super energy efficient. They are airtight or more airtight than regular buildings. Um, and they are a little bit more, even though they have ventilation, it's important from the buildings that we've done and completed and looked at. It's really important to uh, make sure that our materials are as healthy as can be for a number of reasons. Um, so in terms of adhesives, grouts, there's lime-based joint compounds. There's red list-free products that you can get for those grouts, adhesives, and sealants. Um, for the refrigerants, well, we've just talked about that. There's water-based refrigerants that we're using in this case. For cooking, obviously, induction stoves. For flooring, we have low carbon uh, hemp that we're looking at. We've actually just installed these in a passive house project in Brooklyn. Bamboo flooring as well. It's kind of regenerative wood flooring. Um, we really like hemp. It's a really an amazing plant that grows extremely fast. Um, needs very needs less water than some of the other plants, and I think they can do 2 plantings a year. So it's really a miracle product. We just have to have it catch up with all the code requirements that we need them for, right? Um, for tiles, obviously looking at clay, terracotta, um, air quality, we have MERV 13 air filtration. Um, and then for the paints, low VOC lime-based paints we're looking at here. For the roof insulation, we use a lot of cellulose, um, but cellulose is getting more expensive. I think there's less and less newspaper product out there. Is what we're finding and hearing. So we are starting to use hemp insulation. Um, with this building being that it is not adjacent or not attached to another building, there are distances between buildings, requirements like that. I think that we're going to have the opportunity to use hemp insulation here. Um, and for the interior insulation, similar type of strategies. We've looked at sheep's wool as an opportunity as well. There is a cost basis on that too, but we're looking at all these different options. So this is really important for us in all of our passive house buildings. So you're probably all familiar with Local Law 97 um, and the requirements, the amount of emissions emitted from all of these buildings. I have not been able to calculate, yes, where we're going to be at on these buildings, but since they're on the same lot, they will need to meet these requirements. So all of this will be good in the end for the co-op. Currently a D rating. We're hoping to get that up to an A rating. Most of our passive house projects are in the mid 90s in terms of an energy efficiency rating once it's completed. Um, it is interesting that one of the buildings that we built, a passive house building in Midtown, there was another building that was built at the same time. I think it was started about 6 months before us. It is not a passive house, and it was completed, and it has a rating in the 60s. So it's a regular code compliant building built to same code compliances as our other building. And it's just interesting to note what a difference that makes, right? That air tightness and just a little bit more insulation that is required from minimum base code. Um, necessity is the mother of invention. I love that quote. This is why we're all here, looking to do all of these types of buildings. Uh, Buildings of Excellence is a great program. Um, it's been interesting working through on other projects for the different milestones. Maybe some of you are very familiar with this, maybe some of you aren't. So I'll just very briefly talk about it. So we submitted for this. We were awarded $700,000, and basically there will be milestones that we will have to submit for as the building is designed, as it's permitted, as it's completed, etc. So NYSERDA administers this, and we work with our team to provide all of the required documents. And there's quite a lot of documentation and follow-up and work that we need to do to comply with getting the funding for our clients. Um, this is just one example of one of the things that we needed to submit on milestone 2 for a large building. We had changed from 18 to 24 stories, so we had to address that and show what the changes were. Um, Attachment A, which is a lot of data on the building, uh, stuff on how, like, have you done anything that reduces that projected performance and why? Documentation photographs, whole quality control documentation of photographs of all these components that you've put in, marketing plans, and then cost documentation. So quite a lot of work to submit for these, but well worth it. And, sometimes I hear people complaining a little bit about what's required, but what's great about this is we learn from it. It's only when we stop and do this work that we really some of this information sinks in, and we also provide it to NYSERDA, and some of that information is disseminated through lectures, etc., so that everyone can learn from these experiences. So that's the review. If you'd like to let me know if you have any questions.
Stas, maybe not so much of a question, but maybe
Hey, John.
hey, maybe commiserating on trying to figure out the right solution, whether you put the insulation on the inside or the outside of the building, and how do you deal with that transition at the roof? Oh my gosh, like you've got a difficult thermal bridge condition no matter which way you go.
Absolutely. It's really going to be the trickiest part of the
Yeah,
project. So, um, I mean,
I yeah.
sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
on.
No, no, you go
I
ahead.
mean, what we have done in some situations is we've done an interior air barrier that wraps all the way, but then we have to deal with all of the joists at every floor, right?
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
has always been the bane of my life. Let's just put it that way. Um, and we don't like to use spray foam on those upper connections, right, where the roof meets the wall. They never quite work, and
yeah.
foam, you know. So
I did do. I've been undertaking at my own house a passive house retrofit on the envelope. And believe me, there are some tricky things, and there's some things that I've had to do myself because I just couldn't bring myself to ask the contractor to do these like fussy details about like taping around every single little thing with steel embeds. But I brought the insulation to the inside of the wall and ran the air barrier inboard of that, so it's on the warm side of the insulation, and then it is the service cavity inside of that. Um, it did allow me to run that air barrier up and come underneath the joists at the roof and then do spray cellulose above and in all the cavity spaces. But there were some tricky places where I knew the cellulose was not going to get in, so I had to do some spray foam to just kind of fill in those little miscellaneous areas. And there are some really weird conditions where the air barrier kind of wraps around a joist and kind of goes underneath the the subfloor, and it's very weird. Yeah, I don't know.
and
There is
have you dealt with the joists going into the wall, or are you just attacking the difficult areas first?
where the joists go into the wall, I've actually got party walls. So I'm very fortunate that that's an adiabatic condition. Um, but there were some places where the joist did penetrate the air barrier, and I primed it and taped it. And
Yeah.
yeah, but it is, that wood as a low thermal conductivity element is penetration through the insulation and air barrier.
Yeah, and my experience in two projects is that those joists, even in those conditions where you're up against another townhouse, uh, it's still losing air. That's where I'm
Yeah.
losing most of the air in my house. So um, it's a tricky one.
I
Um,
realized, yeah, I've got the same condition, and I realized it because when I was doing some of the work, I could smell my neighbor's essential oils coming through the wall. It was so bizarre. But yeah, these, even though it's a party wall, it's still got um, whatever
yeah,
discontinuity.
I mean, there's two. I've two train of thoughts based on this issue because I've been thinking about it. One is the fact that it is a much larger volume overall than some of these smaller buildings. And uh, our experiences on the bigger buildings, we have more leeway.
Yeah,
So I'm hoping that will help us. The other thing is that one of our projects did not meet the 1.0 as an Enerfit project, and we ended up having to bring in that spray aero barrier technique. And it's not my preferred technique, but it did save the day. I don't know if everyone else is familiar with it, but you go into your home and you pressurize it and you spray this little mist into the air. And what it does is when your fan is pressurizing your building, the air will go to those little holes in the facade and then it will catch this mist that has little bits of components that glue and they basically seal up over time. So that the fan process takes like an hour or two. I I I I've looked at this again. I don't love it because, it's got some sort of silicone in it and but they are buildings that are not connected to other buildings. So you could do it safely, right? Uh, it's always a challenge when for example, a townhouse project doesn't meet the requirements and then you can't, are you going to use this process if will the air go in next door, So
how do you get it to not stick on everything else?
they cover everything. It's a lot of work.
Oh, oh, okay, I bet. Yep.
Yeah, it's about timing. Like you'd have to do it right before some of the finishes, and it's a few days of prep. But it is it is kind of a little bit like a miracle product if you're, I think we were at like 1.2, 1.3, and we just couldn't get it down, and then we do this, and it was at 0.7, point 0.8. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see
Yeah.
how this.
The only other thing that I could think of doing, and it is much more invasive and maybe not even structurally possible, but basically balloon frame within the envelope and support the floors on framing that then comes down at the perimeter, maybe in some interior bearing walls or bearing elements. I don't know. That's not a great solution either because you're doubling up your structure, and maybe the exterior walls are relying on those slabs to keep it from being unstable. But
Yeah. All makes for a good, interesting project, right?
yeah, yeah, new construction certainly is easier.
Yes. Yeah.
I just want to say this is fantastic and I really appreciate it, especially the information in the beginning about refrigerants and dealing with that in a multi-story building like this. And I'm curious, if you all, and maybe you don't do this because you want to keep them to yourselves, but if you've come across contractors that are just wizards at insulating in the New York State, it would be nice to be able to you know share their information and really help them, or perhaps even have them on Passive House Network on, offer training, or a quick discussion on how they're doing things that we can share with others. So, if you guys find a whiz and you're not scared of telling anyone about them, please let us know. You can put it in the comments here or bring it up right now if you've come across anyone who just seems to think out of the box. I
Well,
know in California we have a few.
yeah, I mean, in New York, there's Kevin Brennan, who is an air tightness and or air tightness guru, really. And we have used him on projects to help strategize because as we were, just before this call, Susie and I were talking about, contractors and unwillingness to do passive house. And our solution when the time comes when the contractor is starting to uh, have cold feet or find reasons for not doing it, then we often say, well, okay, we'll take care of that aspect of it, right? You just build your building. You are going to have to jump on board, right, and not and really learn from it, and participate in it, and it can work. It requires a lot of rigor because it's not just enough to have someone come in at certain times to do that insulation or air tightness work. It requires buy-in from that contractor. So in my experience, it's they have to really want to do it and learn from it. And we have to just be able to make sure that that happens. Yeah.
Hey Stas, I had a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. We're just finishing up our, I think, a third passive house project in Brooklyn and running in. I really appreciate that you brought up the air quality stuff because we're running into issues with VOCs in the project, and because it's so tight, like having them dissipate and specifically fire stopping. And I wondered if you had any good suggestions for that.
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that we're looking to do on our newer passive house projects is to have better air tightness between the units because we're finding that there's more, these buildings are more tight, so there's more sensitivity and people notice more some of those smells, etc., from next door, right? So, LEED has a requirement where you have to have compartmentalization. And I think that is one thing that we have to do more of. Because if those units are, each unit is properly compartmentalized, then the extraction and the supply work more efficiently. And air isn't as likely to go underneath the wall or whatever from unit to unit. That's one thing that I think is becoming important to realize as we do more and more passive house buildings. Um, in terms of the actual materials, yeah, I'm noticing here and there that I actually what I do is I just bring a monitor with me, and I have one. And monitors are a little tricky because air quality monitors because they're very, very sensitive. So I'll bring it, I'll leave it in certain places overnight and see uh, how the numbers vary. There's the lovely thing is that 10 years ago it was so expensive to get all these monitors. Now it's really affordable. Um, and you can monitor, you can set up these things, they're like $200 and you can look at it real time and then over time. So you can track it. So I think that's one really good way to do it, and then adjust the numbers uh, and be aware of what areas are better than others. But having complete control over all of your materials seems to be the most important uh, aspect that I think you were talking about, where you really have to make sure all of those sealants or that, nail, what is that well-known goop that they use underneath plywood, nail them or whatever it is.
Liquid nails,
Anyway,
probably.
Liquid
Yeah. So that,
nails.
liquid
yeah.
nails, yeah.
Stinks like I haven't.
It really does. So and if they're not aware of, you have to really, con be aware of all of these materials and get down to the weeds on it, right? It's not just what you see right there; it's what's right underneath because it'll seep through. those little air gaps. But yeah, I think it sounds like we're all coming to the same conclusions, having built some, working on some, that, and hearing from others that this is the next area that we have to really focus on, right? Because the passive as component parts, all of this, I think New York is really showing great leadership in it, and there's such a great amount of ability here, help, etc. So, sorry, I'm talking very much about New York City here. I hope I'm not. Um, it's not it. So yeah.
That's
Another
a
thing,
really,
oh,
oh,
I was going to
sorry.
say another thing that's really coming up, and it was in the New York Times. I think we actually posted about it in our PHN newsletter, is also if the building burns, what's in the air after that, for the few fortunate or unfortunate buildings next door that survive. So we've got that consideration as well as carbon and the indoor air quality. So, there's the sustainable, healthy materials really, really matter for the entire life cycle, right? Not just when we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what comes out on the filters, um, just on the ERV filters, I went to one of our Passive House projects, and client had took out the filter and it was really horrible. And I said, "Oh, can I take that?" And he was like, "Sure." He was very happy to just give me this. He's like, "Why do you want this thing?" But I show my clients, and they can't believe it. No one is aware of this, of what they're breathing in. And you're right, during fire, it's huge. I think everybody has been affected by that, no matter what part of the country you're in. I mean, even in New York City, we had the smoke from Canada, and then we had that New Jersey fire. Permeates so much, into our air.
Mm. Yeah, this is a really great project. Thanks again for sharing on it. And I think with it being like a housing cooperative too, it's really exciting to see a project like this being adapted into Passive House. And I was really fascinated with when you spoke on there being 3 separate buildings that you could potentially do different design features for each and kind of see the performance after. Is your firm going to be doing all 3? Is that
Yeah, yeah, they're all together. So we're going to be doing all three, and I say that, and then I'm like, oh my God, this is such a bad business move if I were to do that, but I'm always making bad business move for the sake of learning. So I don't know. I have to think about it. I think we would learn a ton if we did a different strategy in the buildings. Um, we will probably draw some options and look at the cost basis between going on the inside, going on the outside. Um, and then we learn a lot from monitoring after the fact. And the fact that these Buildings of Excellence grants helps you to do that, right? Because I think any of us who are on the call who have one of these, having a little bit extra fee, because it's so competitive these days, having a little bit of extra time to be able to spend, and also the deadlines and the requirements make you do it. So it's a great learning opportunity for everybody. Yeah.